So getting started with degree days here, my laser pointer. We are almost dead even with normal degree day averages. You can see again where we started here at the beginning of April, being 3 or 4 days behind, and 9 days behind in May, and kind of come back up to about 0 or a half a day. We're almost dead even with degree days for base 42, and we're actually half a day ahead now for base 50. And we'll probably lose that here with this couple of cool days, and then I guess they got some close to 90s in the temperatures again next week. It's this very strange to have a week of cool weather and a week of extremely hot weather, but I guess welcome to weather in Michigan. All the stations are surprisingly very similar. The only one I noticed that's odd is this Fremont one, but I think there's something going on at that station because they've had some weird wetting hours when I look at the sooty blotch and fly speck model. I know most of the growers up there use this new station, that either the Riemann Fremont station or the Etna station farther to the north, which they have lower degree day totals as well, but it's farther north, so that a little bit of separation there. And then our farthest south station is Standale, so a little bit of separation, but not such a big deal as we normally see in some years. Your forecast I grabbed this morning, so a couple of really nice days. This is Amy's favorite kind of weather. And then we're moving into my not so favorite kind of weather, muggy and warm temperatures, and some pretty warm temperatures. I've looked out farther than a week from now, and they've got temperatures hovering around in the upper 80s through 90 or low 90s as we get into next week as well. So it's going to be a hot start to July, I think. So you may need to definitely think about irrigation. I think Phil's going to talk about that, and I think he's going to talk about sunburn in your apples as well. The weather from Wonderground is showing pretty similar. Oh, one of the things I didn't mention is on the last slide is very little chance of precip, except for this chance for showers here Friday night or Saturday morning. A half an inch is showing here, possibly Friday night, just a few hundredths of an inch for Saturday. So I think that will mostly come with this hot, muggy conditions coming in Friday into Saturday might trigger some storms. So it's not going to be all day rain, and it might be hit or miss showers as to who gets the rain and who doesn't. It's going to come with some chance of wind as well. So we're kind of getting into, we've moved out of the May and June that tend to have more ups and downs, and moving into July and August that tend to have more routine weather conditions and a lot less rainfall potential as well. The long-range forecasts that Dr. Jeff Andreessen talked about this week with our fruit team show the same thing, a little bit above normal temperatures and near normal rainfall for the next several weeks. So if you use the Apple Pest Guide, it's real easy to look at the calendar dates and know right where you are, because we're exactly spot on here between second and third cover at 1,300 degree days or so, base 42. So let's go through some insects. I have quite a few things here, so I'm just going to move through quickly. For codling moth, adults should be past peak flight, but I've heard from a few people that they've seen an uptick in their trap numbers this past week, which is a little strange, but sometimes in high populations we do see that. It's sometimes called a bee peak in the population. If you have low pressure, you're less likely to see that. So we are at, if you look at the degree day model, remember I started it way back on the 25th of May. So if you were catching moths earlier than that, you maybe are farther along in development, or if you started catching them later, you might not be quite as far. But looking at where we are right now, by the end of today, we'll be at 500 degree days. And so you get to about 550 or so, that's peak egg hatch. So we're in a period here for the next at least 10 days, if not 2 weeks, where you're going to want to make sure that you are well covered to prevent any stings. There's a lot of eggs out there that potentially could be hatching. So There's not a lot of rain in the forecast, so you should get good legs out of your insecticides. But if something does come and you get an inch of rain or more, you may need to consider reapplying until we get to the end. I extrapolated out degree days just on normal accumulations here with 40 plus years of data, and it's showing that end of generation 1 activities way out here on the 19th of July. It'll really trail off probably more like the 10th of July, but high pressure blocks will need to stay covered during this whole time. So we got a long ways to go yet for codling moth. Oblique banded leaf roller now are flying pretty routinely as adults, and we're at 168, I think that's right. Yeah, 168 degree days from the regional biofix. So we can use this timing to help us in high pressure blocks where you just can't seem to knock back the summer generation. If you use the model and time it for about 400, 450 degree days, that tells you when the first eggs will start hatching in a tiny, tiny little larvae. You can't see them yet. Really, and you can use the model too to help you. We probably won't see visible larvae until we get to the middle of July. And that used to be how the rule of thumb we would use. You find larvae, you spray them. But that might be a little too late in high pressure blocks. So what the model does is makes you pull the trigger about a week or 10 days early. And using 450 degree days, that puts us at about the second, third of July for first treatments in those blocks that you feel OBLR has given you a little bit of angst. And I have seen more and more every year, OBLR. They kind of went away. I think when Ryman was introduced years ago, that really knocked them back. And slowly now they've rebuilt again, and they're out there in some blocks. So if you need to get them and you're having a hard time, you're going to have to pull the trigger early, July 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Or if you don't see them too much, you can wait and scout for visible larvae and then spray accordingly. San Jose scale, adult male flight is declining, and I think crawlers will emerge any day now. We had a great discussion on our team call on Tuesday about, what is a San Jose scale model, what's the best thing to use, and it was kind of thought that somewhere between 350 and 400 degree days, base 51 is a good timing for crawler emergence. The models from the West Coast say 400 or 405 here. A lot of us have said we've noticed crawlers slightly before that. That's important if you're using materials that are systemic in nature. Perhaps one would be to consider would be Movento. It takes some time for the leaves to take that material up and distribute it throughout the tree. So you don't want to wait too long, or you don't want to wait till the traditional timing, which is more like the peak crawler, peak egg hatch, which is out here at 600 plus degree days, which is more like the 7th or 8th of July. So if you've had issues with San Jose scale and you're using a systemic material, you're right at the timing now where you need to get those put on. If you're going to wait and target crawlers at a later stage with more contact type insecticides, you can probably wait about a week. And then Oriental fruit moth, we're right in between generation 1 and generation 2 now. So you get a 7 to 10 day break here. You don't have to be too concerned about keeping your insecticide covers on for OFM. It's a good time to change your lures in between the 2 generations. And using, again, it's just a model, but the model estimates early egg hatch for generation 2. It's about 8 or 10% egg hatch. It's at just over 1,100 degree days from the initial biofix. It's estimated to be the 10th or 11th of July. So you get a little break here in OFM for stone fruits. Don't worry too much about second generation in apples. Sometimes in nursery trees or in young trees, you'll see some flagging over of shoots from Oriental fruit moth, just because those types of plantings maybe aren't getting the routine insecticides that a bearing orchard would get. Red mites, I really think red mites are building, and I'm a little concerned about that I think some blocks are over threshold here in June, which the threshold is 2.5 mites per leaf. It jumps up to 5 mites per leaf in July just because we're that much closer to harvest, and maybe the tree can overcome a little higher amount of red mite feeding because it has a full complement of leaves and we're closer to harvest. However, I'm a little worried that they're just that much higher moving into this early in the season, and we're expecting that really warm weather, looks like for a good week without a lot of rain to wash the mites off. And we're also at a time where your petal fall miticides are probably starting to break. So just keep a close eye on mites. I also am seeing some two-spotted mites out there as well, which just tells me it's a good year for mites. And you probably want to keep a close eye on that. I showed you this last week, just showing how quickly mite populations can turn over generations when the weather is warm. So cool weather, the average daily temperature of 55, which would be closer to the kind of weather we're having yesterday and today, it can take 40 days to go from egg to egg in a mite population. But if you get more average daily temperatures above 70, which looks like maybe next week, you get some warm nights in the upper 60s and some daytime temperatures near 90, then you're here at an average temperature around 70. That mite population from egg to egg can be significantly shortened, 25% of the normal timing. So they can replicate pretty fast, and you need to keep an eye on that. There are sampling charts to help you if you're interested in those. They've been around for a long time. They're from Cornell, and this is the long website. I know you're not going to have time to write it down, but I will be sure to include this in my e-news that I hope to get out today or tomorrow. Aphids are also doing very well. With all the lush green foliage that is out there, I can find all different kinds of aphids now. There's still some rosies out there. They will move on here to other food sources, but there's plenty of green apple aphids or spiry aphids. They're hard to tell the difference. In apples, I do see some woolly apple aphids out there as well. There are black cherry aphids in sweet cherries, and green peach aphids in peaches. I also see beneficials like this ladybug larvae. Here are kind of hard to tell, but their little orange larvae here is a syrphid fly larvae. So there are, and here's another one. The beneficials are starting to be more prevalent as well, which is good. They will help you, but when they get caked on this new foliage like this, they probably need to be managed, and they'll continue to just replicate until we get to terminal bud set, which will slow them down. This is not a picture from now. This is a picture from harvest a couple years ago. Woolly apple aphids don't quite look like this yet. They're just little dark aphids. They don't have all the white wool on them that they'll develop later in the summer. But by managing them now with other aphids, you will prevent this from happening, which is your workers don't like it, and it's just a sticky mess to work in the fall. All the borers are out. I've talked about this one every week for the past several weeks. For your stone fruits, you need to get your trunk sprays on right about now, and probably got a week or 10 days or sometime after the 4th of July for dogwood borer in apples if you are seeing a lot of those feeding on the burr knots as indicated down here. I added brown marmorated stink bug to the report just to remind you. They're out there in adults. The adults are laying eggs, and they're really not catching many on traps. This is a trap from a couple years ago, but just to remind you not to forget to monitor for them. Someone sent me some pictures, and I can't remember who, and I can't find the picture now, we wondered if it was some hail damage to apples or perhaps some feeding from brown marmorated stink bug, which we have seen before right about this time of year. It's actually a little early, but it looks like little divots in the apples, and we think it's Larry Goots termed it exploratory feeding from adults that are just out there looking for a place to lay eggs, and they, as they're passing through, they poke their beak into a few apples and sting them, and it's not any significant amount of damage, but it's interesting to see it, and it's usually on varieties that are quite yellow for this time of year. Most apples are pretty green right now, but some things have more yellow casts, like Goldens and sometimes Honeycrisp. And usually you just see a little bit of it, and then there's the bigger damage happens, of course, closer to harvest. I added just a general term for scarab beetles, which includes rose chafer. Up here on the top are rose chafers. They're not so much a problem here on the ridge, except where we have sandy sites, but I know there's some guys on here and gals from West Central area, and I know you have quite a bit more pressure from rose chafer in some of your blocks, stone fruits and apples both, and I'm assuming they're going to start emerging here, or if they haven't already. And then Japanese beetle, usually sometime when we get after the 4th of July, 10th of July, they start to emerge as well. It's a little bit early for them, but it's just something to keep an eye on. Since this is our last meeting, I just wanted to put it in your brain. And then this is one of my favorite pictures of Japanese beetle, and I blew it up really close. They can do a number on apples. They're not typically a big problem for us in orchards here on the ridge. I think that's mainly because of our heavier soils, but they do tend to like certain varieties, and particularly Honeycrisp is one of their favorites, so that's what this variety is. So just something to keep your eye on. And then apple maggot is a little early yet for apple maggot, but John Wise told us they caught just one fly at Trevor Nichols, and really there's not been any activity anywhere else in the state. But you should, in the next couple weeks, get traps up for it, particularly along wooded areas and in places where you've had issues with apple maggot in the past. There's a lot of different, well, I'm just going to skip that one. There's a lot of different maggot flies. You'll catch them on your yellow boards or your red sticky traps. And so just because it looks like this doesn't mean it's necessarily an apple maggot. You need to look at the wing pattern and to properly identify it. So there are some differences with cherry fruit fly, black cherry fruit fly, and here's apple maggot down here. Phil Schwalier says it looks like a U of M. There's the U, there's the M. Other people say you look for this F pattern on the end of the wing. The one that I catch often in red apple maggot traps is walnut husk fly. The wing pattern doesn't look anything like apple maggot, and it's a very large Rhagoletes fly. It's really easy to tell the difference, but oftentimes you'll catch it prior to apple maggot, so just got to make sure you're identifying it correctly. So the reason I say we've got a little ways to go yet is typically first adult emergence doesn't occur until after 900 degree days, base 50 from January 1. And so we're not even at 800 yet, I think. So we have a little ways to go yet, but we'll gain those pretty quickly here with warm weather. And then you need a rain typically to help drive them out of the soil. They're overwintering in the soil. So once we hit the 900, then you get a rain event, and all of a sudden you'll get a flush of flies. And then it takes a few days for them to mature and lay eggs, and then peak adult emergence occurs in time after that, with peak egg laying more likely out here in August. And then they do have an end time, but they do have a long life cycle. So we're not quite there yet, but close enough, and you can track this on EnviroWeather. There is a model for apple maggot on EnviroWeather, and this is the current as of this morning for Sparta. So you choose your station, then you choose the model, apple maggot, and it'll bring up both blueberry and apple maggot in one report. So apple maggot is saying here, as of today, we are at 719 degree days. This model uses from March 1. It's really not that big a difference. Typically, we don't have very many degree days accumulated prior to March 1 ever. And they're saying that by the farthest the forecast goes out is 7 days on EnviroWeather. So 7 days from now, you will be at 874. So you got a little ways to go. This model uses 955 degree days instead of 900. But I've seen them come out earlier than 900, just depends on the weather. So we've got till probably sometime after the 4th of July before we'll reach this 900 or 955, and then we'll need the rain to drive them out. So that's it for insects. I just wanted to remind you about apple scab, that I think all the lesions from these last infections are showing now. On the 9th of June, that was really my last official capture of spores, so probably the last technical infection period. But then we had a little follow-up rain on the 11th, and light rain. I did not catch any, and if there were some, that those lesions would have shown up by the 22nd. So we've passed that now. So good scouting right now for apple scab is very important to make sure that if you're totally clean, you can say you're totally clean and you don't see any initial lesions. If there is something in there, up in the top, it may take a little while for those to show up, and we haven't had a lot of rain lately to produce any additional secondary infections. So hopefully you don't see that, but don't feel bad if you do. I wouldn't be surprised. This year was very challenging with these heavy infections back here with very heavy rainfall, 3 inches, 2 inches, almost 3 inches. That makes it tough for anybody to stay on top of primary scab. If you do, I showed this last week, but in case there's some different people here today, if you do see some secondary scab, you need to keep your Captan rate higher, at least until terminal bud set. The idea at that point is there's no new leaves, and the older leaves are waxy and less likely to get infected. Also, you move into summertime weather conditions where you don't tend to get as much rainfall when you get, this is usually late July or August. If you do have some scab going, you want to try to discourage lush growth, so reduce your fertility. And anytime you get any rain event over 6 hours with the summer temps that we have, that's a potential secondary infection. And then this was from last year, if it ever quits raining, and trees slow down in the heat of summer. So now I think we're in this. It has quit raining here, or at least this year. As I mentioned up here above, the leaves and the fruit become more resistant to scab, but we lose that resistance when we move back into fall weather, and fruits get closer to harvest, and then we can get some additional secondary scab infection, which oftentimes leads to pinpoint scab that you see on fruit coming out of harvest or out of storage. And then just one final reminder on fire blight. All the fire blight from bloom should be well present now if you're going to see it. And then we had this wind event that moved through here 2 weeks ago, and that if that created a trauma, that should have been present by the end of last week. And we have seen a little bit of fire blight because of that. So if you're going to have it, it should be visible. So hopefully you're not seeing it, but if you are seeing it, if it's not too bad, you should try to get out there and cut it out. George Sundin's lab is up and running and taking samples. If you have something that you just feel like you should have had better control, say strep is something that works for you, and now you feel like it's not, maybe you should have that tested. I can help you with that. So just to remind you, you should be able to see all visible symptoms now. We are seeing a little bit of blight on some newly planted trees. A couple people have pointed that out to me this week in different situations. In my opinion, it started with a little bit of blossom blight, and now the trees are collapsing. That's tough on little trees that are brand new and haven't paid you any money yet, but the best thing you can do is to completely remove them so that doesn't spread and take over and give you hot spots. Trauma blight is still a consideration until we get to terminal bud set and trees slow down. So if we get any hailstorms or wind with this rain coming Friday and Saturday, you need to be prepared as to what you're going to do about that. If your blocks are clean, that's less likely to be an issue. However, fire blight bacteria is kind of present everywhere, and until we get to terminal bud set, all orchards are a potential target for trauma blight. But those that have some fire blight running in them right now are at extremely high risk. So your options are some oxytetracycline ahead of that known trauma event, or other maybe biological type of materials, or certainly the systemic acquired resistant materials like LifeGuard and I forgot what the other one is, ahead of the trauma event. In order to get that resistance, they need to be applied a few days ahead of that. If strep still, thank you, Actigard. it's so common, I forgot. Strep after a trauma event, if you've been tested and you have resistance to strep, you're going to get very little back action. And I know George and I both feel sometimes we wonder why you do it, but I do also understand you have to feel like you have to do something, and it may help with some part of the population. And then if things get really bad, particularly if you get ripping and tearing of foliage, copper is your option after a trauma event. You're going to get some russeting and probably some problems with fruit finish, but it will help stop an infection from killing orchards. And then certainly this is the year to keep your Apogee apps on until trees shut down. I know sometimes you want to just, maybe you had a step program for Apogee and you might decide to leave the last one off. If you have any fire blight in the block at all, do not do that. Continue with your Apogee spray, because I still fully believe that this one material is why we haven't had some major problems with fire blight when we've had such high risk situations for the past few years in bloom. And then go easy on your fertility in those varieties as well. And then summer diseases, we're not there yet. We got to get to about 200 wetting hours of 4 hours or more in length, and that does include heavy dew, not necessarily rain. So here is the model from EnviroWeather for Sparta, and you can see we are at 32 hours of wetting, so not very much. We haven't accumulated hardly any more hours from last week. In fact, I have both weeks up here. This is last week's data from June 17th. So the Sparta station was at 28 then, and today we're at 32 with the same amount of rainfall. So this added hours was just a small 4-hour period of heavy dew, probably in the night hours, that got added in here. There are some other stations. The Fremont station was high already last week, so it's up here to 175, and the Grant station, I know that station tends to run a little more on the wet side because it's in a low area, so they certainly would have had heavy dews there compared to areas around them. They're getting close to that 200 mark where summer fungicides for sooty blotch and fly speck are needed to be added to prevent those diseases from starting to appear. Most of the other stations are well less than 100. Standale's 124, so they've got a little ways to go yet. So you can use this model to help time your first spray, and actually in the model you can put in your fungicide, your date of your fungicide, and it'll tell you how much longer you have to go before your next one based on the amount of rainfall you get. So it's quite variable this year based on wherever your site is. And just wanted to quickly mention, Phil reminded me that silverleaf is present. It's a really slow growing fungal pathogen. It's systemic in the tree, so the only way to manage it is to take the tree out. So this is a healthy leaf, and this is a leaf that the tree is infested with this really slow growing fungus. Usually it attacks trees that have some winter injury, and then you'll see there'll be 2 or 3 trees in a row. It does spread from tree to tree through root grafts, possibly through pruning, but that's less likely. It does not spread through insect vectors, but it can spread from tree to tree through root grafting. And then also some different types of virus are showing up in apples. This one is apple mosaic virus. Again, a virus is something that's internal in the tree. There's nothing you can spray to manage it. The only way to get rid of it is to pull the tree out. Most of the viruses that we have in apples are not spread by insects. So those of you that have vegetables know about like aster yellows and some of those viruses that are spread by insects that can do a lot of damage. These are, you probably bought this virus when you purchased your tree from the nursery, unfortunately, through maybe some dirty propagation. And nurseries are better now these days, I think, at staying clean on this, but this is time of year when it will start to show up. No long-term effects other than you could see some reduction in yield overall compared to a block that didn't have virus. So I'm going to stop there. Just remind you about sweet cherries for those of you that are going to harvest. This warm weather is going to be just perfect for brown rot to get in, and the birds are probably going to do a bigger number on your sweet cherries this year just because there's less fruit for them to steal from you, and so the percentage of damage will be that much higher. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you, Phil.
I'm going to talk about fruit diameter right now. We are the 24th of June, and this is the normal growth pattern for fruitlets that we developed a few years ago. And we're just right about on target. Here is Honeycrisp at 1.2 inches in diameter, and that's pretty darn close to the normal growth pattern. And all the rest of them are right in the same ballpark here, about a little over an inch. And they're going to grow rapidly here with this heat that we've got coming. So we will be right on target for fruit size. There are a few trees that have a heavy crop load, such as Max, Honeycrisp, Gala, some Gala blocks. And so the fruit size will be probably normal for them at the harvest time, but probably got to do some hand thinning or some pruning on those trees to reduce that crop load. I want to talk about sunburn, mostly a yellow and green variety problem, especially on those colors, but it can be a problem on any fruit. It typically is a problem on fruit that is 1.5 inches in diameter or larger. We're at 1.25 to 1.3 right now. Southwest Michigan and Southeast Michigan, you are entering the window for sunburn problems. Intense sunlight will exacerbate it, and temperatures over 80 degrees Fahrenheit are when you have potential for getting sunburn. As the fruit grow in late July and August, they start to move and they expose greener portions of their fruit, and you can get sunburn on that part. And of course, in leaf pruning, if you do that just before harvest and it's extremely hot, you can also get sunburn there. There's 3 types of sunburn: a sudden exposure, and this is what I was talking about, fruit moving, or summer pruning when you expose fruit and you're on a hot day or very intense sunlight, you get that photooxidative sunburn. Then there's sort of an in-between sunburn that happens when the fruit is exposed. The temperature of the peeling is 114 to 120 minutes. You'll get that sunburn necrosis. Here is a max air temperature, and you see in the gray line, when you get above 90 degrees, you get spikes in temperature, surface temperature of the peel that can really rise up above 120 degrees, and you'll get sunburn out of that. So be ready to start protecting your trees here starting next week. This is an example where the limb was moved and sunburned. They might have tied the limb down or something, and it was exposed to sunlight for the first time underneath these leaves, and you got all the sunburn. And of course, when it really gets cooked, it gets necrosis. This type of sunburn, browning, happens when they're exposed to high temperatures, moderate high temperatures, for 60 minutes or so. And again, another picture of photooxidative sunburn. The leaf was removed and the fruit burned. Now, Amy's already shown you this. We're supposed to get towards 90 here towards the end of next week, and supposed to have a number of days above normal temperatures near 90 degrees. These are prime windows for sunburn protection. You can cause sunburn yourself by putting foil down on a hot day or sunny day, and all that fruit underneath that hasn't seen the sunlight is all of a sudden exposed, and that will burn if you pick the wrong day. You want to use do it on cloudy days and cooler days. So the foil and reflective covers can exacerbate sunburn. Summer pruning can exacerbate sunburn. If you're hedging, you can cause sunburn. Be aware of these possibilities for giving yourself trouble. I've tested a lot of products. All of these products on this list, I've tested them for sunburn protection. Probably the best two are Diffusion and Haven, and I don't think Haven's available anymore. I think Diffusion gives us the best results year after year. Rain-X is right up there with them. I don't think you can get that either. So, but I would suggest that you talk to your chemical guys and figure out what you need to do for that. Let's move on to water use. We are going to move into a very hot period where we're going to use 4,500 gallons a day, or 5,000 probably on these really hot days next week. So get your irrigation turned on and be ready to put on 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches of water per acre per week. This is the current predictions for Sparta. We are well past we're at 1 inch deficit right now, and we will be a 2 inches deficit here in June 27th or so. This is probably a better way to show that. Last week I showed you that we were going to reach 1 inch deficit on about the 22nd, a couple days ago. And we had that cool weather that slowed things down, water demand for the tree. But you can see when we had that 90 degrees, we were close to 4,500 gallons of water a bearing tree needs per day in order to replenish the water demand that it has to produce leaves and shoots and fruit. And by the end of, 4th of July, roughly, we will be in 2 inch deficit, according to the model. Now I'm guessing what the weather will be, what the demand will be here the next 7 days. So you need water, sandier soils, run it more often for a shorter duration. Same thing on stone fruits. You'd run it more often, and young trees, you run it more often. Let me move on to apple maturity. I showed you this last week. Our bloom date was May 19th, 2020, the bottom chart. That was 4 days late. And the way we use this, way our model works, is it takes the full bloom date, 40-year average is May 15th, and it predicts the 3 days after full bloom, the weather at that time, the average temperature. If it's 1 degree warmer than average, then you hasten harvest by 1 day. If it's 1 degree cooler, you would delay harvest by 1 day. So for 2020, we are 4 days late on our bloom, but we also, for those 30 days, had 4 degrees warmer temperature on average, and we are predicting normal harvest dates for the ridge area. The west central area, actually ridge and Belding. I only got a few predicted harvest dates off the EnviroWeather. Deerfield is almost normal here. September 9th, September 23rd, September 29th for Red Delicious. Those are pretty much normal harvest dates, give or take a day or so. Benton Harbor is also fairly normal, a day behind Southeast Michigan, but those are almost normal harvest dates for Benton Harbor area. The only one we have in our area that is predicting right now is Standale. Walker Weather Station, and that's predicting max. It's the 15th. Jonathan's the 29th, and October 5th for Red Delicious. Those are pretty much normal dates. So I'm guesstimating here because I don't have a model for Sparta yet. It says it will be available on July 1st. I'm guesstimating almost the same dates, a day later or so, for those three varieties. Pretty normal temperatures, pretty normal dates. And then we base all the other varieties based on McIntosh. We use Paula Red, Ginger Gold, Gala, and Honeycrisp. We kind of look at the McIntosh predicted date and put that in there. Gala is a variety that doesn't work with the model every year. If we have a really hot August, Gala tends to be advanced over our predicted dates. I want to move on quickly to, since this is our last meeting, Amy, I've done some work with trying to increase return bloom on Honeycrisp by using fall Ethereal or fall NAA after harvest. And if we use a quart of Ethereal, we increase on average about 2%, maybe 1%, not much. At least in this one year. This is only year I have. I didn't do it other years, so maybe this is a fluke year. But anyway, NAA 10 parts per million after harvest tended to increase return bloom on Honeycrisp 10%. On Johnny Gold, it had basically about the same response. If I get ambitious, I would look at that. Now, what I'd like to do is just briefly run through Retain and Harvista here quick. Here's a picture that of Retain treated Honeycrisp. You almost can't believe they're Honeycrisp. They're so beautiful. On the right, we used full rate twice, 30 days before harvest and 7 days before harvest. And we delayed the maturity about 30 days to 40 days. And you can see how beautiful these apples colored up. You can do this with Gala as well. And you know the characteristics of Retain. It's dose dependent, time dependent, variety sensitive dependent, and crop load dependent. And I think Harvista is basically sort of the same, works the same way. If you put full rate on 30 days before harvest or a reduced rate, you basically reduce the time that the fruit are delayed. Full rate will give you a maximum delayment, and multiple sprays will also maximize the delay in maturity. And Galas, Honeys, and Johnny Golds act differently than all the other varieties, which are indicated in the blue arrow here. If you reduce the rate, you don't get as much of an effect. So basically, you can choose what response you want in your varieties by the rate you put on, the time that you put it on. Here's different timings. If you put a full rate on 30 days, your delay may be 10 days. If you do it 21 days before harvest, your delay it may be 11 or 12 days. On the normal possibilities for putting on 2 sprays or putting on a half a spray twice. Basically, the more you use, the more impact you have. Crop load also has a big impact. If it's a heavy crop load, you can really delay them a long time. Harvista is similar. When we studied this in 2017-18, it delayed maturity, increased average fruit size, reduced internal ethylene, increased firmness, increased bricks, delayed starch clearing, improved red color, reduced drops, increased storage firmness, and delayed maturity by 3 to 8 days. So Harvista is very similar to Retain, but you have to put it on closer to harvest. So if you will, this is my impression of how Harvista works. If you use a split application, let's say 5 and 10 days before harvest, you get probably maximum delay and maturity, maybe 8 days. If you do it at 7 days before harvest, just one application, you delay maybe 7 days, and 5 days before harvest, maybe 4 days. 3 days before harvest, maybe delay 3 days. You get an extra time. So Retain and Harvista work similarly because they impact the ethylene in the fruit. So this means you get to choose what you want to do. The longer you wait, the more red color you have, the more mature the fruit will be, and the less delay you will get is if the closer you put it on to harvest. I want to show you a trial that we did last year on Galas. We put on a full rate on September 8th, 7 days before harvest. We put it on 1 day before harvest on September 14th, and we also included trees that were not harvested. We put it on 7 days after the predicted harvest date. And this is sort of what it did to maturity. The earlier you put it on, which we've already seen, the more you delay maturity. And even 1 day before harvest, you can delay maturity, maybe 5, 6, 7 days. And of course, if you put it on after they're mature, you have to pick them shortly. And Gala doesn't really drop, so it hangs on the trees nicely. But you got to pick them pretty quick, and you can't really store them because you pick them after they're mature quite a bit. This is what it did to the fruit. If we put on the 7 days before harvest, the red line, we had maximum impact on delaying internal ethylene. We put it on 1 day before harvest, we also delayed internal ethylene, the green line. And if we put it on after they were mature, after harvest, it still delayed additional internal ethylene compared to the untreated check, which ethylene just took right off after maturity. If you look at the starch index, it does the same thing. It delays the clearing of the starch index, and a higher rate the earlier you go, the more you have, the more impact you have. In firmness, it also did that. Not as big a difference, but we basically saw an improvement in firmness but it was quite variable. And of course, average fruit weight is much closer together, but there seems to be a benefit from putting these retains on close to harvest. Now, I think you can do the same thing with Harvista. I've already seen that in the 2017, 2018 trials. That's it. I went through them quick. We have time for questions now. Any questions out there?
Phil, there's a question from someone. Does Retain or Harvista change the storage ability of apples?
Yes, both of them do. Generally, it improves the storability of apples as long as you don't abuse the timing. For example, I gave you that example where we put Retain on after harvest. Harvista is one that I think you can pick and then spray Harvista after you pick and still improve second and third picking on, for example, Galas.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And then Kyle Rash had a question more about diseases, about products that have overlap for blight, secondary scab, and summer diseases. The only thing I can think of that would take care of all of those things would be copper, but then you're going to have a problem with your fruit finish and also might hurt your leaves. Blight, fire blight is bacterial, so products have to be specific to bacteria. The other are caused by fungi. So for secondary scab, Captan's probably your workhorse product to use through the summer. And then for summer diseases, Captan works on, there's a lot of different, there's two main fungi that cause secondary disease, summer diseases, but they're actually, it's a complex of several different fungi. Captan works on, I think it's fly speck, but it doesn't work on sooty blotch or one or the other. I think the good materials for summer diseases in general are the Sterile inhibitors, the older version of SIs or DMIs like Rally or products like that. Although I've heard some people say they feel like those aren't working as well for them for mildew and maybe summer diseases. Keep that in mind. And then the other product would be the Strobies. The strobilurins are actually very good for summer diseases, as are the newer SDMIs, the various types of fungicides that fit into that category. So you do have a lot of choices for summer diseases, a little bit less for scab. And then for fire blight, that's a tough one because it's kind of all on its own. Did I confuse you, Kyle? Oh, go ahead, Phil.
We're supposed to have some pretty hot weather here the next 10 days, 14 days. And then the forecast for July and August is supposed to be above normal temperatures again.
Mm-hmm.
Long range forecast, if they're right. Would other type of southeastern United States type diseases like bitter rot or white rot or black rot, would those be a bigger problem here?
Possibly. There is some thought that bitter rot can be more of a problem when apples get injured from sun or intense heat. Of course, if they get injured enough to have sunburn, then your rots and things move into that possibly. But just the fruit surface and the lenticels get injured, and then bitter rot can move into that tissue and cause problems. You won't notice that until you pull things out of storage. So I worry about getting hot and dry summers, and then we stretch out our fungicides only to find out that we end up with a lot of fruit decay on fruit coming out of storage. So you don't want to let it get a place to get started through the season so that it doesn't show up in harvest.
I know it. If it doesn't rain, you just think, well, I don't need to spray.
Yeah, you stretch it out. Yeah. Yep. I mean, that's where that rule of thumb is at 3.5 pounds of Captan, just keep that out there through the summer. That helps clean up a lot of problems. Just to have it there. If you have things like ongoing scab or black rot, this is the time of year you might see black rot express itself on leaves. It's also called frog eye leaf spot. So black rot's normally a wood rotting fungus, but if you get situations where you have a lot of it, old cankers, it can actually then show up on leaves. And if it's showing up on leaves at this time of year, it's likely to cause fruit rot later in the season as well. Any other questions? Okay, they're quiet. It is exactly 1 o'clock, so we'll call this to an end. At this point, Phil and we won't be doing any more of these weekly updates, but we're already talking about other things, meetings for you to talk about getting prepped for harvest and things through the summer, because we still can't have physical meetings. And also, I'm available if you have something come up that you need me to come look at. We do have limited ability. We have to do distancing and things like that. But if you have something come up and you need me to come look at, very happy to do that. So it's just me and the dog here. So we'll be happy to come out and visit if you need a visit. So, and then if you do have fire blight showing up, or if you have scab and you want some of that to be sampled and tested for various resistance, the Sundin Lab's available to do that as well. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us and being patient as we meet in this new way. And watch your email, and we'll send you a notice about other future meetings. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.